Hello and welcome to the Inner Revival podcast. This is your host, Monika Kirkland, and I am so glad that you are here. Whether you are in your car, you're watching on YouTube, you're on a walk, or you're with your kids or running errands, I am just so grateful that you are taking the time to listen to today's episode. It is my deepest prayer that it leaves you feeling encouraged and equipped to walk out your faith and to experience revival from the inside out. Today's conversation, I'm going to be talking with my friend Tabitha Panariso about her new book, Loyal in His Love, an invitation to be held by Jesus when others let you go. It is such a beautiful testimony and story, and she has so much wisdom as a mom, as a counselor, and just weaves together so beautifully her faith and theology and her wisdom with counseling. And so I know this conversation is going to edify you and bless you. And so without further ado, please enjoy this conversation with my friend Tabitha. Welcome to the Inner Revival podcast, because revival starts with you. As we allow God to heal, restore, transform us, and renew us from the inside out, we say, Lord, have your way in us. Let your kingdom come. Let your will be done in us on earth as it is in heaven. Hi, Tabitha. Welcome to the Inner Revival podcast. I am so excited to talk about your beautiful new book, Loyal in His Love.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be with you.
Yes, it's so good. So you have walked through rejection in your past, and you have now written this beautiful book to encourage all of us who might also be facing it. But I would love if you could start with just telling us a little bit of your story.
Yeah. Well, I guess I could start with some basics. I am married. I'm a wife to my husband, Ethan. We've been married for 17 years now. We have 3 kids, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old. I am a Christ-centered and trauma-informed therapist. I own my own private practice here in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and now I'm an author. It's funny, I feel like a lot of my life informs the work that I do and the words that I write. You'd think that they'd be kind of separate from one another, but in fact, they really feed into each other. I think really this book was kind of spurred from just a couple of years ago, a moment in my life where I went through 2 really devastating friendship breakups. Had never really experienced that before, at least in that degree. And while I was in the process of trying to heal from that, really opened up this realization that my life, just in general, has been marked by rejection, even abandonment and betrayal, and realized that that moment with those friends actually became a catalyst of digging deeper into what really had informed a lot of how I operate in my life. My dad, my biological father, he left when I was around 5 years old, and really never saw him since. And there's just been many stories in my life where I've just experienced the hurt of people leaving and walking away, or not caring enough about our relationship or my heart to fight for it, and really saw a lot of connections to how that's formed me as a woman, how it often held me back from being who I believe God made me to be. It changed the way that I even showed up in relationships out of self-protection and, just this fear of being rejected, or even being hurt by people that I wanted to care about. And so this lifelong wound became really just kind of festering and manifested itself in so many ways in my life. And thank God I was able to have this moment of putting it all together. And the Lord really just gave me insight into how I could make meaning of it in a way that wasn't just fake or rushed through the devastation that I think rejection often brings to us. I would look around, and I just found that we talk about rejection, sort of. We all experience it, certainly, but the way we talk about it really felt shallow and almost
Mm,
hollow to me as someone who's experienced rejection to the nth degree, and really just was asking the Lord, what is it that I can learn from this that will
mm,
actually change me from the inside out, instead of
yeah.
creating more barriers or walls. Because often when we use like pithy platitudes like rejection is redirection, or,
Hmm.
what doesn't kill me makes me stronger, those really are just
Yeah.
self protective defenses. They're
Mm,
not really us processing or
yeah.
moving through what's happened to us. And so,
Mm,
uh, yeah, that's a little bit of what I've journeyed through, and kind of what compelled this book. And
mm,
grateful to be on the other side of it, and to, I
yeah.
think, be a to be the whole version of myself that for many years I was unable to be.
Mm. Yeah, that's so good. That's what we talk about a lot on this podcast is that transformation from the inside out, really getting to the
Mhm.
root, really, allowing the renewal from the Holy Spirit to come and to heal. And a lot of times I think we have those symptoms, but we're just addressing the symptoms, not getting to the root.
Mhm.
And I think for me and my own story with rejection, I was completely oblivious that certain behaviors and ways that I was acting in the world or towards friends or other people that
Mhm.
I would meet or churches even was actually underlying cause of this rejection that I carry, the spirit of rejection. And I'm curious in both your life and even in your practice, what maybe are some of those cues, those things that you've seen that this is actually rejection and it's manifesting in this way? I know for me, it was, through perfectionism. But I'm curious,
Mhm.
what ways have you seen that underlying rejection manifest in people's lives?
Yeah, perfectionism is definitely a big one for me as well. So I relate to
Mhm.
you in that. I think that also correlates to self sabotage, really preventing
Yeah.
yourself from stepping into something that really is for you, but that fear holds you back.
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
in many ways, especially for me, I saw it in wearing masks. So becoming a
Mm.
shapeshifter. Being the person that you thought you needed to be in order to feel like you can belong, right?
Mm.
In order to really navigate and survive different groups, just kind of not being a shell of yourself, really.
Yeah.
Um, that was, I think, a really big symptom. And what I see in a lot of other people is really just holding back and shrinking back, and
Hmm.
not being that full version of who they are.
Yeah.
Um, and really also
Mm.
just isolating, probably not engaging in the way that you'd hope to. Um, for some people, it might even look like not being able to be in relationship with people. Like they'll tiptoe
Mm.
into it, but then out of
Yeah.
fear, they might self sabotage it and then
Hmm.
pull back
Yeah.
because of that fear. So there's a lot of different ways that we really kind of manifest that, like that spirit of rejection in our life. Definitely for me, the biggest was the wearing the masks constantly
Yeah.
wherever I went.
Yeah. Kind of like a changing bits of your personality or behavior so that you can be approved and accepted by other people. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think, which honestly, growing up, I felt it was a strength. I mean, I was
Mm.
like, I'm coping. This is a great ability
Yeah.
to have. And it is a strength, but I think often the things that we become really good at are actually just a reflection of the way that we've had to survive when we were maybe younger, if we
Yeah.
experience some
Right.
hurt or even trauma. And it's just not sustainable. And so I think
Yeah.
that's really the hinge for us is, okay, that was really great up until a point. And then you start to
Mm.
feel the weight of what you're doing, and you realize
Yeah.
that you can't live that way any longer.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so true. And it's hard when we're fighting for the approval and acceptance of other people because their opinions are always changing, and people can be very fickle, and they are not a good source for our affirmation and for the acceptance and love that we crave. And I love that you just state that so poignantly in your book about, being held by Jesus when other people let you go, because people can come in and out of our lives. And I know you touched on this idea of the friendship breakups that you've had. And I know for me, some of the, yes, there was childhood rejection and wounds, but as an adult, some of my hardest moments, deepest griefs have come from friendships, people letting you go, from friendship breakups. I'm curious what that's looked like for you, just that healing journey of healing from that rejection, and then how to build relationships after that. What does that look like now? Trying to form healthy, trustworthy friends after going through something like that.
Yeah. I think after a friendship breakup, at least for me, the biggest question was, what's wrong with me? And so having to acknowledge the maybe shame that you might carry after something like that, of feeling like you aren't enough or you're too much, and really surrendering that to the Lord. And I think even being open to understanding that, yeah, you might have had some responsibilities in how that friendship operated, but there isn't something wrong with you because it didn't work out, because you couldn't save it. You couldn't make it work. And so I think really interjecting a lot of self-compassion. And, I think some people can get a little nervous about that, of, well, how can I give myself compassion? And really, compassion is just, self-compassion in general is just us receiving what Christ has already given to us, and allowing us to embody what he already longs for us to have, that mercy and that grace, regardless of how messy we might feel or how broken we feel. Christ enters into our life no matter what. And I think when we are recovering from a friendship breakup or a relationship fissure, if you will, really, can we meet ourselves with that compassion? Can we sit with ourselves in that moment like Christ sits with us, and extend to ourselves love and understanding? Can we dismantle this idea that we have to criticize ourselves and condemn ourselves for what we perceive as our wrongdoing? And so that's really the initial response, is really just sitting in that space and not running from it or beating ourselves up for however we thought we played a role.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm actually reading this book right now. It's called In the Grip of Grace. It's actually an older book from the 90s, but it has been so helpful to me in realizing that sometimes, I have a really loud inner critic, and I realize a lot of times it comes back to just a misunderstanding of the grace of God. And so I'm always trying to get that into my mind and heart, because it's really easy for me to extend grace to a friend or to someone else when they fail, but to myself, it's really hard to show compassion and to walk in grace. And so I love that idea of self-compassion. I'm curious what that might practically look like.
Yeah. I really take from one of my favorite therapists. Her name's Kristen Neff. She talks about self-compassion a lot with her work. And it really is practicing a new narrative, right? It really is being intentional about the thoughts that we're thinking, and not trying to just replace them. But for example, if I'm feeling a particular way, if I have this big feeling that really is leading to me condemning myself or criticizing myself, it might look like looking at that feeling and saying, okay, I feel this way right now, and it sucks, right? So it's kind of delaying any kind of judgment or placing any kind of moral wrongdoing and having that big feeling, and then moving to a place of what Kristen Neff talks about is this common humanity, that we all share these feelings in common. We're not the first person to go through what we're going through. We certainly won't
Mm,
be the
that's
last
good.
person to go through what we're going through. And that allows us to really step back and see the bigger picture, right? It allows
Mm,
us to see that this is something that we can overcome, that isn't going to keep us stuck forever, because we can think of these examples of other people who have overcome them. And then the last
yeah.
step is really just meditating on um, really the goodness and kindness that you can extend to yourself. And that
Mm,
can look like a variety of different ways. I think for believers, it might be finding a particular scripture that stands out to you where Christ is really encouraging
mm,
you of, it might be, hey, may you remember that God's goodness and mercy is following and chasing you after you all of
yeah.
these days, right? It might be you remembering who the biggest cheerleader is in your life, and um, becoming them for a second, as you said, like,
Yeah.
what would my husband say to me in this moment? What would my best friend
Mm,
say this to
yeah.
me? Um, so it could look like a lot of different ways, but it is really just meeting yourself and
Mm,
then speaking to yourself with that love, and practicing speaking to yourself with that love.
yeah.
And we know too that, you know,
Mm,
that changes the way that our brain operates, right? Like that
yeah.
is less, I mean, it can sound to some people kind of like woo woo, but really in practicing changing the
Mm,
narrative, you are
yeah.
changing the neurons in your minds. You
Hmm.
are allowing them to form a different pathway. And hopefully, the more and more you do that, the more likely your mind will go into that direction of loving kindness instead of
Yeah.
inner criticism.
Yes. Oh, that is so helpful. That reminds me of this one quote that I heard by, I think it was Bob Goff, and he said, it's sometimes, so I have this thing where, if I go to a social outing, I'll get afterwards, I'm great at the outing, but I'll go home and I'll just think of everything that I said at the party, and I'll just criticize, like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, why did you say that? Or they probably think this, or why, oh, they look at you this way now. And he said that if that happens, to just start saying, oh, well. Just two words, just, oh, well. And I don't know why I found that practice so helpful now. Like, instead of spinning or like marinating on, well, they probably think this of me, or, oh, I think I was misunderstood, I just say, oh, well. Like, if they misunderstood me, or if I was made a fool of myself, oh, well. I don't know why. That was just, it made me think of what you were just sharing. But it was just a
Yeah.
helpful practice of like just kind of changing the narrative a little bit of just, oh,
Mm-hmm.
well,
Yeah.
like that.
Surrendering it is what it sounds like. How can you
Yeah.
surrender the thing that most has its grip on you?
Right.
What does that look like?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm curious now, you've been through this healing journey of healing from
Mm-hmm.
rejection, and you've written this beautiful book. I'm curious if, what that looks like now, if a rejection happens, or perhaps you're triggered by an old rejection. What does that look like now for you?
Yeah, I think it looks exactly the same. I wrote this book knowing that it's not my job to tie a pretty bow on the concept of rejection.
Yeah.
We as humans, we want to, it's like one and done. Okay, processed it, dealt with it, never going to bother me again, never going to hurt me
Yeah.
again. And I really refuse to participate in that kind of almost toxic positivity, if you will, that I think I've learned that rejection is inevitable, and
Hmm.
people are going to disappoint us. And my job is to allow myself to be pointed back to Christ over and over again.
Yeah.
And
It's good.
that looks like really reminding myself of the rejection that Christ himself went through, and
Hmm.
what that meant for me, what that meant for him, what that means for us. And really allowing that to be a uh that's what I carry with me, right?
Yeah.
Is that rejection really was the pathway to resurrection for Christ. And that
Hmm.
means that rejection can be a new way of living life for me as well. And so any
Yeah.
opportunity or circumstance that presents rejection, I look at it with fresh eyes and I say, okay, I'm going to acknowledge that this hurts because it
Yeah.
does. And
Right.
I'm going to practice self-compassion, and then I'm going to land in this place of giving it to God and letting God teach me what it is that I need to be taught in this moment, and really
Yeah.
surrendering it and doing that over and over and over again,
Mm.
that it's okay for
That's
us to be in the
beautiful.
process of becoming. That's the
Mm.
life of a believer, right? Is
Yeah.
our constant transformation. And so, um, I guess to shorten that, I really just welcome it. I welcome
Hmm.
it and I don't fear it. And I let
Yeah.
myself feel it. And then I let myself surrender it to the cross
Mhm.
each time.
That's beautiful. I love what you said about you let yourself feel it. I think so often people can deceive themselves and they'll get this like, well, screw those people. Like they don't know what they're talking about, or they just get like this kind of
Mhm.
tough persona of like, well, that, I don't care. They don't know anything. Like I'm not, and it's a false sense of feeling like their opinions don't matter. And of course, we don't want to live
Mhm.
for other people's opinions, but I do think there is something valuable in acknowledging when you have been hurt and to just allow yourself to feel what you're feeling and then express
Mhm.
those feelings to the Lord rather than acting like whatever, their opinion doesn't matter and just brushing it under the rug.
Yeah, I think something I talk about a lot of humility and how that really is, um, we can experience humility when we allow ourselves to fully experience our humanity. And so
Mm.
really that is the way through rejection, is not pride, is not pretending
Mhm.
like we've figured it out. It's not even
Yeah.
this fake, um, self righteousness or even
Mhm.
independence, like that we can be dependent. Like that is the
Yeah.
response, is not to
Mhm.
become more independent, but to become as dependent as we can on Christ,
Yeah.
right? To lay down the
Mhm.
pride and allow ourselves
Mhm.
to lament, allow ourselves to grieve, because lamenting and grieving, I believe, actually lead us to praise. That
Mhm.
is the
Yeah.
entryway into it. And so we don't have to pretend to praise. We can actually go through the steps, be human, and then end in
Yeah.
worship to the Lord because of our
Mhm.
dependence, because of our humanity.
Yeah. That's so good. And I'm curious too, you're a mom of three, I'm a mom of
Mhm.
four, and in little ways, I'm walking my children through rejection. Just, my daughter auditioning for the school play and not getting, the part that she wanted, and just smaller things like that. And I'm just curious as a mom and as someone who's walked through rejection and as a therapist, what insight would you have as to walk your children through those rejections now? And does that prepare them for bigger rejections in the future? But I'm just curious what that looks like.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance, right? I mean, as a mom, it's hard because you want to have the answer. You want to
Hmm.
fix it right away. You want to be able to put a stamp on it and say, okay, you're going to be fine next time. You're going to do better next time. And
Hmm.
that's probably true, right? It's probably true that things will be better next time. And you want them to feel like they can get up again and conquer what feels impossible. I feel those same things, especially with my older kids, where they'll go through these, playground dramas, if you will, or they struggle with
Yeah.
friendship situations. And it's really easy for me to want to like be, the knight on the white horse, if you will,
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
save them in their distress. But a lot of times when I parent my kids, I really try to start from a place of honesty, um, and acceptance. And so that might look like me sharing a story with them about a time when I experienced something similar. I think
Yeah.
that allows them to zoom out a little bit and say, oh, okay, I'm not the only person who's gone through this or experienced it. Because look at you now, mom, like look at all the things that
Yeah.
you've done, right? Like they're
Yeah.
aware of your personhood as much as they can be anyways. Like they're aware that you're grown up and you've survived childhood,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so really starting there with honesty and
Mm.
even just in the way of soothing their wounds of, yeah, people sometimes make decisions that are unfortunate for us, right? And
Mhm.
it really hurts when we don't get what we want. And it really hurts when we can't be in relationship with the people that we want to be with. And it sucks when
Yeah.
our dreams don't come true, right?
Mm.
And I think reminding them that while those things can form us, they
Mhm.
don't define us. Other
Yeah.
people's rejection of us is not an indication of our worth or our value or our belovedness.
Yeah.
And bringing them back to that place of who they
Mm.
really are, regardless of who they have or what they have in their life, is the answer, right? Of
Yeah.
your identity is not defined by these things or by these people, but by
Mhm.
who Christ is to you. And you are loved by Christ, regardless of your failures or your brokenness
Mm.
or your mess. And I love
Yeah.
you. Your mom and your dad, we love you, regardless
Mm.
of what you accomplish and what you achieve or who rejects you or even who is
Yeah.
not for you. We are for
Mm.
you. And so
Yeah.
really just coming with them, coming alongside them in that, I think that's how I've been practicing it as
Mhm.
of late with them.
Mm. That's beautiful. And I think we all need that reminder as you're sharing that. I'm like, yes, I think we all need to hear that. Like, that's such a good reminder. I love what you said about, our identity not being by what we do or what we achieve, because I think
Mhm.
for so many of us, I think you talk about this in chapter 5 about graven images and
Mm.
idols. And yeah, so many of us can make an idol out of what we do or what we achieve. And we think that our worth and our value is measured upon our productivity or how successful we are. Or I'm curious what you would say about that, if you could unpack that a little bit that you share in that chapter.
Yeah, that was probably one of the hardest chapters I had to write. Um, that really was this piece of recognizing, why does rejection feel so impactful to us?
Hmm.
Part of that is rooted in just the way that we are created as human beings. And part of it is because we do idolize the people and the things, the dreams that we want in our lives. And that's
Yeah.
why it hurts so much when they turn away from
Mm.
us. And so, talk about how we can become complicit almost in our own pain and wounding,
Mm.
maybe become a victim to it, if you will, and how that complicity is really just about us getting folded up in something. And I think that's a really great picture of what happens when we become consumed by a relationship or a dream or even an institution. We love
Mm.
it so much and we just become so dependent on that thing. And it's okay for us to love it, to be loyal to it. But there is this very thin line of us crossing over from enjoying something and delighting in the beauty of it versus it becoming the thing that has saved us or is saving us,
Mm.
is
Yeah.
giving us the life that only Christ should be giving us. And I
Mm.
think we often do that. And we often don't even realize that we're doing that until it's too late, until that relationship burns to the ground, until we're hurt by the thing that we put our all into. And I don't say that as a means of like, okay, let's hold back and like, let's be self-protective. That's not what I mean. It's more just let's check our alliances
Yeah.
here. And
Mm.
are we more loyal to this over here than we are to who Christ is and how he provides for us and loves us
Mm.
and is faithful to us and is steady for us? Is he who is defining us, or is it this relationship, or is it this
Mm.
institution, or is it this dream? And so we very quickly, I think, as humans, fall complacent to the other thing instead of the kingdom.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know that was definitely true in my story of about 14 years ago now. I was young and living in LA and pursuing this dream of acting. And as someone who already struggled with rejection, I don't know why I chose a career where you have to literally face rejection every single day. Even now with writing and stuff, it's the same thing, lots of rejection. And I look back at that and I will say that I did allow it like to consume me. It was just like
Mhm.
this identity, this longing. And yes, I delighted in the actual acting, but it just consumed me in an unhealthy way to where every rejection stung even more because it felt like it was keeping me from this thing that I wanted and needed to. And so, and then
Mhm.
I look back at that time and I'm like, I was so anxious and depressed in that season because there was just so much. I just was putting hope and peace and longing and my desire just in a place that it was never meant to be. It was just an
Yeah.
unhealthy balance of and so I totally resonate to what you just shared with that. And looking back, I wouldn't have had the language for it back then, but yeah, I think I had made an idol out of it. I'd expected it
Yeah.
to give me more than it ever could, and it went beyond
Mm.
just delighting in it or enjoying it. And so I think that's a really important thing to consider in this conversation, that people could then take that in prayer, and probably
Mhm.
requires a lot of authenticity and a lot of vulnerability before the Lord to say, God, have I allowed this thing to take up an unhealthy place in my mind and heart?
Yeah, I know that. No, and what you just said was really good too. The vulnerability piece of, I wonder for you when you were able to realize that it had become too much in your life. And I'm curious if that's why you walked away or if it was more in hindsight that that happened for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a big part of it. I think ultimately it was an obediencing of the Lord calling
Mm.
us away. And so, but I still was acting when the Lord called us. We moved about 2 hours away, and I was commuting to LA at that time
Mm.
for auditions and to be on set. But I think the separation was enough for me to see, like, wow, like this thing is hurting me more than helping me, and it's not
Oh.
fulfilling me in the way that I wanted it to. And so I don't know, just the distance in a way it just gave me new eyes to see it more clearly, and was something that I just had to, yeah, ultimately surrender to God and say, I always say I was so laser focused in this one path that I felt like I had to walk down. And then when I stepped away and I got the distance and I was able to heal more, it became clear, like, wow, it was just like I could just see things more clearly. I was just so zoomed in on it. And then once I zoomed
Mm.
out, I was just able to, I don't know, just heal and approach my life in such a different, healthier way. And it opened me up to new interests and new desires new creative outlets that I didn't even know I had, because I was just so unhealthily focused on this one part of my life. So it was a long, that was over a decade ago. So it's been a long journey since then. And I still love to act and I love drama and film and all of that. But
Yeah.
it just had a hold on me in an unhealthy way.
Yeah. I love what you said about just that physical proximity, because I was just thinking, it is really hard to identify when something has become an idol in your life. And a really great question to reflect on is, what would it feel like, or how would I feel if this thing was taken away from me? If it
Mhm.
was put at a distance from my life. And I think, for those people who are listening, that's a heart check of, if there's this fear or this resistance or anger that
Mhm.
rises up in you in response to asking yourself that question, that's a pretty good indication that maybe you're more entangled in that dream or idea than you thought you were
Yeah.
before.
So good. Such an important question to ask. And
Mm-hmm.
I know you have a few other questions that you walk people through in that chapter, which I think is so helpful because sometimes, I think we can just go through the motions and we get caught in these patterns, and just taking that step back and asking the hard questions and being honest with our answers. It can be just that
Mm-hmm.
little shift in the right direction that can begin to set us on a path of healing. And
Yeah,
it can start with
that's
just
right.
that awareness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the honesty
So
piece is
good.
a big, big theme throughout the book. Even in the
Yeah.
very beginning, I tell people,
Mm.
I say, I know that this is the kind of book that at any moment you might want to slam shut and not ever open again because of
Mm.
what it might do in your heart. Um, but I do believe that honesty is the conduit of healing. And if we can't be
Yeah.
honest with ourselves, then we might not ever heal the parts of us that are so desperately crying out to be healed
Mm-hmm.
by the Lord.
Yeah. And I think we deceive ourselves so easily and we distract ourselves so easily
Mm-hmm.
that until we take the time to really be honest and to explore those things, we just might never get there. And I mean, they say, there's this hope that you get older and you get wiser. But honestly, unless you really take the time to be honest with yourself, I think that's just not true, that you could get older and not get any wiser because you haven't been honest with yourself and you haven't healed and you haven't processed before the Lord. And so I think there's a humility in even being willing to ask yourself those hard questions that is so important too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. Oh, well, Tabitha, this has been such a good conversation. I'm so proud of you. It's been such an honor to just know you. I've, just through online and everything, but follow your journey with writing and releasing this book. And it's just such a beautiful book. And I know it's going to bless and help so many people. And I would love to just invite you to just pray for the person listening. Maybe they realize in this conversation that they might have some wounds of rejection that they weren't even aware that they had. And so if you would just pray for the person listening, wherever they're at in their healing journey, I would just be so grateful.
Yeah. I'd love to. Lord,
Thank you.
thank you that you are the embodiment of compassion and mercy and grace, that through your actions of coming from heaven to earth, you show how you meet us in the most broken and most dark and hard places and spaces of our life, in the margins, in the crannies where we might feel the most alone, the most invisible, the most unseen, Lord. We pray that your spirit right now would just tenderly touch those who need just the encouragement to be honest with where they're at. Maybe they have recently felt rejected and were rejected. I pray that you would meet them there and give them the courage to be honest about how they're really feeling, that they might open up themselves to you, to the goodness that you have for them, the way that you want to bring them through and out of that, the way that you hope to realign their hearts with yours so that instead of being dependent on others, they can be dependent on you. And I pray that you would allow them to not only receive the compassion that you have for them, but that they might be able to replace even the way that they speak to themselves, that they might be able to give themselves grace too. Lord, I just pray that in all these things, that your word would just translate more than any other person's word in their life, God. And that they would know that while rejection can sometimes feel like the end of a dream or the end of a relationship, it is certainly not the end of them, Lord. That there is so much more that they have to look forward to, that your goodness and your mercy are chasing after them, even right now in the lowest of lows. We love you, Lord, and we thank you for how you are steady and faithful in your love, that you never leave us, even when others do. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. This was such a joy.
Yes, such an honor. Well, how can everybody find your book? I'm going to make sure to link it in the show notes, but and then stay connected to you.
Yeah, so I think the book is sold at Amazon for sure, Barnes and Noble. I think I saw it on Target online. It's pretty much
Okay.
everywhere. And then of course I'm online at Instagram at Tabitha Panariso. And then I also have a Substack called Unseen Things, which they can find if they follow the links on Instagram, where I, do my best to integrate faith and therapy and theology all together in one while sharing my own personal stories. And so those are the ways that they can keep up with what I'm doing right now.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to put all that in the show notes. Thank you
Mhm.
so much for your time. Thank you for your encouragement and for these beautiful words. So, so grateful.
Thank you. I appreciate you and I appreciate what you're doing here and how you're creating an honest and open space for people to just come to Jesus wherever they are.
Thank you. Okay, friends, that is it for today's episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I pray that it has encouraged you and blessed you and given you some food for thought. If it has, please make sure to share this episode. You can share it on your social media or send it to a friend, and I would be so grateful. God bless you guys. We will see you back next week.